morning. Good to be with you today. So I was off yesterday. You may have noticed if you tuned in to watch this episode, it was not here. I was in Milwaukee at a Toby Mac concert, enjoying some good music with Toby Mac, Crowder, Cochran and Company, Kane, and Terrian. Really great show. Enjoyed that. That was my wife's birthday present, so got to enjoy a weekend with my wife, uh, and it was a lot of fun. So thankful for that. Thankful for the opportunity to get away. Hey, I got a little different background here, a little scene here. Looks like I'm getting pat. I wanted to pat myself on the back. I'm going to step out of the way here. Check this out. So quite the scene that we're looking at. Uh, that is similar to another scene that maybe we're familiar with, that one of Michelangelo. And we're going to look at that in a little bit, but we're going to be talking today about this topic, which is, let me pull that up here. How hasn't science disproved the Bible? So we're going to take that through the remainder of this week, and that's once again, these are topics that we can uh, go on endlessly about. And in fact, we'll come back to this over and over again, I'm sure. Because as we go out into the world, this is what we're meeting. This is the context in which we live. Uh, that science is not an enemy of the Bible, and the Bible is not an enemy of science, but somehow the world has effectively portrayed it as such. And so the impression is that science and Bible are adversaries, and that they constantly disagree, when in fact, how can you put the one who created the natural laws and set them in motion in opposition to the laws themselves? So we want to actually just look at that from our worldview, which is a biblical worldview, and see how we can take that out and maybe answer some of the challenges, or at least feel comfortable and confident within the context of the world, knowing that these challenges constantly exist, and that there's a tension. There's a tension because there is only so much that we can know. We are not God. I know as much as we want, and this is where it really comes down to it. We are not God, but we really wish we were. So that's been the problem with this creation that has fallen since the fall itself, is that fall came as a result of wanting to be like God, to possess the knowledge of good and evil. And we were tempted into the pursuit of that which belonged to God alone. He's omniscient, that omniscience. Interesting word there to describe God, isn't it? The one that we say as opposed to science is omniscience, omniscient, and that means all-knowing. And science is that pursuit of knowledge, and God knows all things, and yet we would try to take him out there and know it apart from him, which is the problem. When we try to apply science apart from God, as opposed to science with God, we might say we're one science under God instead of one nation under God. That the science, true science, finds its knowledge from the one who possesses all knowledge. And so it doesn't take him out of the equation. It tries to understand the nature of the world that he's given to us. And that's important, because from a stewardship perspective, the better we know it, the better we can care for it and provide for it. But oftentimes our science goes little toward actually providing, and just toward achieving a greater knowledge, and maybe in that way feeling a little bit better about ourselves. In fact, taking that perspective of, this is uh, patting myself on the back. This our scientific achievements. Look how far it's taken us. How great we have begun. How knowledgeable we are. And yet, as we go, even as we become more knowledgeable, we become increasingly aware of how little we know. So the knowledge library is vast, and we should continue to pursue knowledge. Uh, but let's make sure that we understand that science doesn't necessarily have to be in competition with the Bible, nor the Bible in competition. In fact, I think the greatest science is one that acknowledges the fact that God exists, uh, and doesn't just try to remove him from the equation. And I think it misses a big part of the equation. It's like saying, how can 1 plus 1 equal 2 if you take one of the ones away? It no longer works. And neither does science actually work very well apart from God, because it continues to uh, draw in new assumptions and things, and which is what we're going to talk about. So let's move into our study a little bit, kind of setting the stage, setting the context in which we're going to work. Let's go to our first. So, hasn't science disproved the Bible? Let's answer that question right away. No, no. But there are scientists that don't believe the Bible, and so they're going to work to try and disprove it. So that's not unusual. But what is science? When we look at science as it's defined for us, it's a noun. Okay? It's the intellectual and practical activity encompassing the systematic study of structure and behavior on the physical and natural world through observation and experiment. So the observation experiment is to understand the natural laws that affect behavior and the physical and natural circumstances of the world in which we live. Why does this happen? We ask that question a lot, like when we go through certain circumstances and we don't ever really say, hey, this is a scientific study. Why is this happening to me? But that really is science. You're asking a question, and then you're going to draw certain conclusions, which may form the basis of what we call a hypothesis. And the why is this happening to me isn't just why have I fallen into this certain set of circumstances? This happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, and the sequence of circumstances. Why is this happening to me? Some of it may be just simply circumstantial. Like I drove my car, I didn't check the fuel gauge, I ran out of gas. Why is this happening to me? Well, we might say there were supernatural influences that kept me from looking at the gas meter, or supernatural influences that caused the gas to run out, or supernatural influences. Or we might just say, I should have checked the gauge. I should have stopped at the station. I should have filled up the pump. And work through that process there to just come to the conclusion of, hey, there are reasons why I ran out of gas because I forgot to fill it up. And so we can look at that. Well, the same thing occurs not necessarily through those circumstances like that, but in every other circumstances, natural laws, like why did the apple fall from the tree? It was ripe. The wind was blowing. Gravity, that's a big one. Or something else knocked it loose. So we can come up with a hypothesis of this is why. After we ask the question, why did this happen? Then we come up with the hypothesis that says this is why, and then we go about the process of trying to prove the hypothesis, which is a supposition or proposed explanation made on the basis of limited evidence as a starting point for further investigation. Okay, so you get that the hypothesis is your first guess of why something happened in a particular way, and then you go about trying to prove or disprove that hypothesis. Now, there are some things that you might look at right within the definition there. It is a supposition, so it's a guess. It is a proposed explanation as to why it might. I think this is why this might happen. It might be based on some criteria or evidence that would lead you to that conclusion, like We've come to understand gravity, the nature of gravity, so that helps us understand why an apple might fall from a tree. Uh, so those sorts of natural laws, believing them to be consistent, we apply to this particular scenario, and that helps us form our hypothesis and come to its conclusion. But now we have to study that to determine whether or not our hypothesis is valid. Okay, and there's some other things that enter into that study. Like I said, it was a supposition. That's part of the definition. It's a supposition to provide justification or explanation as to why something occurred. But there's also what's called a presupposition. Okay, so a presupposition is something that unintentionally, I believe this is primarily unintentionally, although sometimes intentionally, a scientist or any individual person can approach a particular hypothesis or theory, and they have a presupposition, or they have a certain amount of things that they already believe are true, whether they are proved right or not. So they might bring in unproven other factors into their study, knowingly or unknowingly, and apply them as though they were all proven, which then throws your whole study off. Or you simply provide these factors and limit the idea or notion that there would be any other contributing factors. So you have this certain amount of presuppositions that you as a human being naturally apply. And I would say this is your context. So when we talk about just bringing this into our worldview and bringing this out into there, we have to understand that people are acting within their own context, their own set of presuppositions, their own belief system, and they apply that to everything. So when they come into this hypothesis, this theory that they've developed, they're going to bring all of those presuppositions with them, not just the supposition of the hypothesis. And those contribute toward the swaying of that hypothesis in one direction or another. And then the critical thinker is going to say, well, what can we say for sure here? What is a proven portion of this? And how far can we take this in applying this to natural laws? Okay, so the natural laws that I've made reference to are those things that are consistently proven over time, that God has set in place so that the systems, and we have multiple systems in operation just to sustain a life here on this planet. And we can be thankful that God set these natural systems in place, and they operate under consistent rules. So that because they operate in this way, we can know that we'll have air tomorrow to breathe, sunshine to heat and warm the earth. Those gravity will continue to keep us on the ground. You know, if we are dependent upon that to kind of make our way to walk. Have you ever tried to walk across the bottom of a pool? It's very hard. But God has made it possible for us to walk all over the place. So all these natural laws make it possible for us to live and to live with purpose and meaning. So the presuppositions are the thing that is tacitly assumed beforehand at the beginning of a line of argument or course of action. So these things are all brought in, and there's a big word in there that we have to address. This is the elephant in the room that corrupts all science, okay, including people that operate from a biblical worldview. We would not be correct in assuming that we are the only ones on the planet that operate without presuppositions. We have a presupposition. And here are the two basic ones. God exists, God doesn't exist. God exists, God doesn't exist. We, from a biblical worldview, operate from a presupposition that God exists. Now, we can set that aside and try to think without that, but I don't think that's a fair method of operation either, because that's as though we were to say that creation could have come about. Even to voluntarily set aside our faith is to assume that creation could have somehow come about on its own. And yet God exists, and God made it. But he used natural laws, as though natural laws could have existed apart from God. See, that's where the shortfall comes in. Someone established these laws. He didn't have a legislature, didn't go through Congress, didn't use a committee, and but there had to be an establishment of these laws for our basic survival, that they had to exist. So I think that even though Christians need to be aware of that and can have these conversations, to set God apart from that and say we voluntarily leave him out of our discussion may be very harmful also by ignoring the presupposition. But we definitely want, because I think he supports all the other ones. But that's my presupposition, and you see where we go with that. All right, so here's the big word. Here's the elephant in the room that corrupts all of this discussion on both sides, and that is the word assumption. You have to assume. The presupposition assumes certain things. An assumption is a thing that is accepted as true or as certain to happen without proof. So we're assuming certain things. And this occurs both at the beginning and the end of the hypothesis. So at the beginning, we draw in certain presuppositions that assume things to be true, even though they don't necessarily have proof. Now, they might have happened in the past, and there could be some even level of consistency in their happening in the present. But our assumption then gets carried over into our hypothesis, so as to assume that everything has operated the same from the beginning to the present and will continue that way into the future. And I don't want to go into what an assumption means, but you know what an assumption is, to assume. And we don't want to necessarily fall into that trap of assuming proof that doesn't exist. So the better way is to actually acknowledge the lack of proof at certain points. And this is true on all levels. So when science seems to indicate that it has all proof, you should not buy that cow, okay? That's not the cow that's going to produce the milk that you want to drink. You need to have a clear understanding that science also is constantly pursuing knowledge, and that where we are scientifically today is very far from where we were scientifically 100 years ago. And that's a good thing. We want to continue to increase our knowledge base. But God existed 100 years ago, and God continues to exist here. We didn't know him perfectly then. We don't know him perfectly now. We don't know his laws perfectly then. We don't know them perfectly now either. And we need to continue. I love what 1 Corinthians 13, when Paul writes that love chapter and says, now we know in part, then we shall know fully. Now we know in part. We only know a little bit. But there'll come a day when our knowledge will be satisfied. Till then, we hunger and thirst for more knowledge. And we grow in our knowledge. But that pursuit should not cause us to reach for the forbidden fruit, or to try and obtain a knowledge that isn't ours to obtain, or to make our objective to become gods for ourselves. And that's where the problem comes. To become the people that have all the answers, when it's impossible for us to have all the answers. So that's that what is that? Conceited, arrogant to think such a thing. Um, I certainly don't think that. I think there are a lot of very smart people out there. And by the way, not all scientists are atheists. We're led to believe that. That is not true. I just want to very firmly assert that not all scientists are atheists. Some of the most brilliant minds in the world have not ruled God out of the equation. So keep that in mind when you're being led by a world, a media, and a lot of different elements that continue to forgot to hit the silence on my phone. Continue on to influence us. That was some scientist objecting to my presentation right now. All right. So here we go. Science. Here's an illustration of a paper that I'm going to blow that up so we can see that a little better. Okay, so this is a website that I was looking at from Scientific America. I was interested in this because I was looking at some of the different science media that's out there, and some of it's very, I mean, it can be really interesting to read. Some of it's just hokey, okay? But here's an article that writes how scientists discovered the staggering complexities of human evolution. And I want you to understand that this is an editorial that's trying to put together pieces of science and present them in such a way as to assert this bottom word, evolution. It's right at the top here, evolution. There's a big emphasis here, obviously, with the subcaption, Darwin would be delighted by the story his successors have revealed. So you can tell that there are suppositions and presuppositions galore in what is being shared on this website. And what was interesting was I was going in search of stories that recently, I mean, by recently, just in recent years, have been published talking about how DNA evidence seems to point to us coming from a single pair of ancestors, that we all come from common stock, like Adam and Eve. Okay, so that's the point of we all find our origin from a single set of parents. Well, this particular article would deviate from that thinking, that line of thinking, just to show that there are variations on that theme that come across as to how the human race developed. I like the Bible description myself, so I go back to Genesis for those answers. But in this particular story, I thought it was interesting because this writer, scientist, would suppose or offer the supposition that the human race developed by interspecies relationships. In other words, there were a variety of species that bred out certain qualities that eventually became human. These were humanesque species, so it wasn't like a horse and a giraffe or something like that, but similar types, so monkey and ape or something like that, hominids interrelating with one another. And then characteristics developed over time, and that formed the basis for the evolutionary process. I just thought that was an interesting how this particular scientist approaches that. And of course, one of the big things in this is if you don't have a creator, you have to create a timeline that's really elaborate to allow for the development of these things. Now I've got this background here. Go back here. I've got this great background. Part of that was when I was on. Figure out which way I'm supposed to touch. There it is. When I was on my little weekend excursion here, turned on to a science channel, and they were talking about time travel and all sorts of spatial uh, travel, like traveling through wormholes and doing all this stuff. And I found it very interesting because I'm kind of a Trekkie anyway, so I like the sci-fi stuff. And it's not that I think that any of that is necessarily impossible, but I think it's very interesting, and the avenues by which they traverse that topic are pretty pretty extraordinary. Um, but when I get to this picture, it's obviously an offshoot of, let me this up here, of this picture. Okay, and that was God creating Michelangelo's depiction of God creating Adam. Okay, so there it is, the image of God. In the image of God, He created him, male and female. He created them, and that idea of that right there, and then we go back to that image right there. And when I look at that, this is what came to my mind. First off, when I saw that, I saw Michelangelo's depiction, but then I began to see it from the scientific perspective of reaching out the hand to grasp the forbidden fruit, or to become. It wasn't. I'm not trying to sin here. When I want you to understand, when I make that, I don't know that the people were intentionally trying to sin so much as they were acting in disobedience to God's command. I don't know if you follow that, but it wasn't that they were acting to try and defy God or in enmity with God, but their actions put them in defiance of God. That I think even Adam wanted knowledge, but it was knowledge that was forbidden for them. It was, he didn't want them to know evil. He didn't want them to know evil. I mean, just think about that. If you're the progenitor, you're the one who's providing the offspring, and you're raising the children, and you're rearing them in this world. How much evil do you want them to be exposed to? How much do you want them to know of evil? And you think about it, and we've gotten to that point where we start to think, oh, we need our children to be raised with a good knowledge of what's going on in the world, so they're prepared to handle it. The truth is, I wish my kids never knew evil at all. I wish my grandkids never had to witness evil at all. And that pursuit of knowledge that they thought was going to make them more like God brought us into this world where we have Ukraine in the headlines, and Russia, evil Putin, Putin's war, atrocities, killings. Saw a post just yesterday about a man who helped children who were not adoptable in Ukraine to be adopted in the U.S., and he stayed to fight in this battle for his country and was killed yesterday. All those children that were helped by that man to find families, I wish none of them knew the evil that they know today. That's what we're talking about. So when pursuit of knowledge is great, we don't know what we're looking for sometimes. Sometimes we're just in our pursuit of knowledge, we're asking for stuff we don't want. Like, hey, let's play with some viruses in a lab. How about that? Let's just play. I wonder what we can do with this. Maybe we can make it more aggressive. Maybe we can make it do this or that. Hey, how about we inflict the whole world with a pandemic? So this is not anti-science talk. We should grow in our knowledge. But we shouldn't play God either. And that's what this picture depicts, is that movement toward playing God. So I want to share with you a couple readings. Here, this is the first one. with regard to our gods. Let me move you into that. Remember this and stand firm. Recall it to mind, you transgressors. So we are fallen people in a fallen world. We shouldn't be led to believe that our minds can always protect us. We really need to keep in mind God. We can't take him out of the equation. Remember this. Stand firm in this, okay? Remember the former things of old. For I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me. Declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times, things not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will accomplish all my purpose. There is our God. And he doesn't stop being God just because we ignore him or take him out of the equation. Okay, so we should never lose sight of the fact that we as Christians come with certain assumptions, presuppositions that add to our hypothesis, just as the unbelieving world comes to the table with the same sort of things. If they don't believe God exists, it's no wonder God's not part of the equation. But just because they can't see God in the works doesn't mean we should ignore him. And so that's a big part of our starting point, is understanding even in our scientific basis, we can use those we can use science to point to our Creator rather than point away from him or describe it without him. That's just so critical that we understand that. Let's give our Creator praise this morning. God, we do take time right now to remember you, to thank you, and praise you for this world in which we live in, and all of the things that we have yet to know and understand of it, that you have given for our benefit and for your good purpose. But God, as we pursue this knowledge, help us not to pursue it, knowledge ignorantly, as though it's all good when much of it leads to evil. Help us, God, to be guided by you in this pursuit and to never ignore you, forget you, but to make our firm stand with you. And help us, God, to not only see you in the scientific process and the pursuit of knowledge and its acquisition, but also to share you in a way that we're not ashamed or afraid of these discussions, but knowing that you add a substance to these discussions that no one else can, and help us to be confident of that. Thank you for allowing us to believe in you, for giving us your Holy Spirit. Strengthen our faith and our walk with you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, well, it was good to be back with you this morning. I want to wish you well as normal. Peace to you on this day. Have a great day in the Lord. I'll see you tomorrow.